And this is KAOS 89.3 FM, Olympia Community Radio. The following commentary is not necessarily the opinions of the staff, management, or underwriters of KAOS or the Evergreen State College. It is the opinions of the guest and the host. That being said, it's time to talk a little bit about some of the things coming up in the community. This is KAOS 89.3 FM, Olympia Community Radio. This is also Parallel University, and I'm your host, Kim Dobson, here again for another hour with some great guests. Coming up first is David Keith Cobb, who is the 2004 presidential candidate for the Green Party. We're going to be talking all things political. Some of his more recent work is being the founder of the Move to Amend, taking corporate personhood away from corporations and working on different democracy improvements to the Constitution. So we're gonna hear about the Green Party. We're gonna hear about probably Bernie and Hillary and Trump. And second up is our friend from Minneapolis, Coleen Rowley, retired FBI special agent. We're going to be talking about the fallout from the Orlando nightclub shootings, the gay nightclub that was 49 people lost their lives, another 50 were injured. We're going to talk about the call to go after ISIS and the false statements that news media and candidates are making. All right, David should be calling us real soon. In the meantime, the following opinions do not necessarily represent the opinions or views of the staff, management, or underwriters of KAOS or the Evergreen State College. They have the opinions of the guests and the hosts.
Featuring Wind Talkers, Chemical Language, Bad Luck, and more. June 24th to 26th in downtown Olympia. Tickets and 3-day passes available at the door of each show. For more information, you can go to oemf.freehostia.com.
If you have experienced unwanted, coerced, or forced sex, you are not alone. Safe Place can help with someone to talk to, support groups, help with legal issues, help with medical needs, information and referrals, and shelter. The Safe Place 24-hour confidential helpline is 360-754-6300. No matter what, it was not your fault.
We have David Keith Cobb on the phone lines with us today. Welcome to the program, David.
Thank you, Kim. It's a pleasure to be back with you.
Yeah, I think we were on the air. You were here live in the studio sometime earlier in the year with Michael Savaka from Washington Move to Amend and Initiative 735.
That's right, Kim. Your memory is good. I had the privilege of being in the KAOS studio where we were in the middle of the petition drive to put that initiative on the ballot, and WAMN folks, as I'm sure your listeners know, succeeded. We are super excited to share that, in fact, Washington State voters will get an opportunity in November to support a constitutional amendment to abolish the illegitimate court-created idea that a corporation is a person with constitutional rights, and to abolish the equally odious, also court-created idea that money is political speech. So this is a very exciting time for us. And in addition, I want to take this opportunity, Kim, to share the great news that when I was in the studio last, I talked about how Washington would become the 17th state because 16 states had already called for an amendment. But I am happy to tell you that yesterday, New York State already became the 17th state. So Washington is going to be 18, but Washington will be 18 or 19 because since we spoke, California has qualified to be on the ballot in November. So the movement is because people like KAOS listeners are actually getting involved and getting active in a movement to take our country back from these corporate hijackers.
That's very good news. I read the news about New York State moving the legislature. Did Governor Cuomo sign that?
You know, it does not require a governor's signature, Kim, because it is considered a resolution and not legislation. So so that was not required. But I will tell you the great news that the Republican State Assembly, which is their House of Representatives, actually is controlled by Republicans. It's a Republican majority. So when we were here last, we were talking about how this movement cuts across party labels and political ideologies. New York State really underscores the reality of that statement.
Yeah, it does cut across party lines. It's in it's in no one's interest unless they're in the pocket of corporations to continue this current system. It does not.
It really is, Kim. I think that the move to amend approach is really a way to concretize and politicize the 99% versus the 1%. Because, as you say, whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, a Green, a Libertarian, an Independent, rank and file people support the Move to Amend campaign. It is only the rich and powerful and the ruling elite of the two existing political parties that like the system the way it is. So this movement is getting larger, stronger, and better organized, and people don't understand. It's not that this movement is not going down without a fight. This movement is not going down.
So how many states do we have to get? I think the magic number before it goes to Congress is it like 35? Is that?
Well, no, you're on the right track. It's 34 is the magic number for ratification. But we're not in the ratification mode. We're still in the building political demand mode, Ken. I mean, ultimately, it takes 2/3 of the states to call for a constitutional convention or 2/3 of Congress to propose specific legislation. So the reality is that we now have a We the People amendment introduced into the Washington, D.C., our federal government, and if folks want to help assist and push the congressional legislation, they should contact us nationally at movetoamend.org, and we will give you all sorts of talking points to talk to your congressional representatives about joining as a co-sponsor. The good news is that last congressional session, we had this bill introduced into Congress, which would have actually initiated the ratification process. We had one sponsor and 3 co-sponsors. This session, Kim, there are 2 joint sponsors and 20 co-sponsors, including, and wait for it, a Republican. Representative Walter Jones of North Carolina has actually joined, and we now actually have a Republican supporting the call for a constitutional amendment to abolish corporate constitutional rights and money and speech.
Well, that's really good news. Congratulations. I know you had a lot to do with getting Move to Amend started, and what year was that when Move to Amend was a brainchild?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked the question, Kim, because the reality is that Move to Amend formally began as an organization in 2010. That's when 12 of us gathered in the living room to float this idea about whether we could launch an amendment campaign. But of course, it wasn't just 12 individuals who just met in a bar. These were 12 people who represented organizations and groups who had been doing democracy work, work against corporate power for decades. Many of us, in fact, were on the streets of Seattle during the WTO protests of 1999. Others of us were involved in other ways with the global justice movement of the 90s. Many of us came out of the Green Party organizing effort. Many of us came out of work for racial and social justice. Others came out of work around environmental protection. The thing is that those 12 individuals also represented organizations like the Alliance for Democracy, like Reclaim Democracy, like Democracy Unlimited, the Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy, Liberty Tree, the Independent Progressive Politics Network, Progressive Democrats of America. The point is, it was a broad spectrum of people who had been doing work together in 2010. But still to say, there were only 12 of us. Today, Kim, we are 405,000 people and growing every single day. We have helped 17 states pass resolutions of support of the Move to Amend effort. We have helped 650 communities pass resolutions of support. That's where city council members or county commissioners get on board and vote in their city council or county board of supervisors to vote on it. But my favorite objective number is we've actually been on the ballot over 350 times. That's where ordinary citizens get to weigh in at the ballot box, as you will do in Washington State statewide in November. Do you support a constitutional amendment to abolish corporate constitutional rights and money of speech? Kim, we've been on the ballot 350 times. Can you guess how many times we've won?
I'm not sure. I mean, would it be 17 times?
The answer would be 350.
350.
We literally haven't lost yet. And yes, that includes very liberal or progressive places like Boston or San Francisco and Madison, very liberal political jurisdictions. But Kim, we also win in very conservative places like Salt Lake City, Utah. We won in Waukesha, Wisconsin, which is the hometown of Republican Tea Party Governor Scott Walker, but they haven't voted for a Democrat for president or Congress in 40 years in Waukesha, Wisconsin. Move to Amend was on the ballot there, and we won with over 70% of the vote. We were on the ballot statewide in Montana. And yes, Kim, I mean that Montana, one of the most politically, culturally conservative states in the Union. Move to Amend was on the ballot, and we won 74% of the vote. So when I tell you that Move to Amend is getting larger, stronger, better organized, it's not just rhetoric. There is objective, concrete numbers to demonstrate our growth. And when I tell you that this movement cuts across party labels, it's not just rhetoric. It's not a talking point. It's genuine reality. We are growing a movement that is going to actually address who rules in this country. Will it be we the people, or will it be the rich and powerful?
It was brought to my attention, I got a little note in the mail from some activists for 735 that a opposition group has sprung up, which we can't figure out who the funder is, opposition to 735, and I'm not sure if it's the Koch brothers or some other
Yes, I saw that too.
501c4.
Yes, I saw that too. And isn't it interesting that they're not even willing to put their name on it, right? I mean, I like just how embarrassed of your political position must you be that you're not even willing to put your name on your position. So yes, it is true that Washington State has earned an opponent, but that opponent is so far anonymous and nameless. I think that's an indication of just how cowardly a political act it is to say we want to keep this corporate money in elections and we want corporations to be overturning democratically enacted environmental protection laws or worker safety laws or public health laws, but we don't want you to know who we are.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a dangerous position to be in a blue state, to be against 735. I think it will pass overwhelmingly in this state. We came up with in the caucuses, Democratic caucuses, we are 73% for Bernie Sanders. So
Well, I saw that, and I got to say, having the privilege of doing organizing and educating in Washington State, I was not surprised by Bernie Sanders' success in the caucuses. I am not surprised by the fact that you are seeing, a genuine progressive movement continuing to build in Washington State. I will take this opportunity to share with KAOS listeners something interesting that I'm tracking. The Bernie Sanders campaign really did not create a movement. Bernie Sanders' campaign galvanized multiple movements of people. Let's acknowledge Black Lives Matter, 15 Now, Occupy Wall Street, Move to Amend, it's, the fight against the Keystone Pipeline, the fight against Trans-Pacific Partnership, the fight against income inequality, and the fight to end poverty. I mean, there are so many movements that are coalescing today, and I think that the Bernie Sanders campaign really was a sort of a flare in the sky that so many people rallied around. So let's acknowledge this as well, Kim.
Yeah, I agree.
We don't know exactly what is going to happen, but I can tell you there are 5 different things that I'm personally tracking and that Move to Amend is relating to that might emerge out of the Sanders campaign. In other words, not just going into the Democratic Party as happened with Jesse Jackson or Jerry Brown or Tennessee Senator Howard Dean. I think that what we're seeing is independent politics happening because there is right this weekend in Chicago, Illinois, a gathering called the People's Summit being led by National Nurses United and the People for Bernie. Move to Amend is sending some of our people there to find out how we can continue to collaborate and grow this movement past the Democratic National Convention. But it doesn't stop there, because in both Cleveland for the Republican National Convention and in Philadelphia during the Democratic National Convention, there are 2 efforts to create people's platforms. And Move to Amend is associated with both of those. That is where organized people, constituencies, are actually building a platform process outside of the Democratic or Republican Party process so that the movement is making a demand that is different and beyond. And it doesn't stop with those 3, because I also want to point out the Bernie or Bust movement, which continues to grow. They've got, I think, over 110,000 people who have said they are going to either write in the name Bernie Sanders or vote for Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate. They're not going in for the Democratic Party, and they're not going to go with Hillary Clinton. And then the 5th thing that I want to really note, and that is an organization called Brand New Congress, which comes out of paid Bernie staffers who have decided that they're not willing to stop either, and they want in 2018 in every single congressional seat in this country to have progressive challengers in both the Democratic and Republican Party primaries. And get this, if they don't win one of those 2 major primaries, they want to try to run an independent or a Green Party candidate in the general election. So that's 5 different examples, Kim, all of which are outside the Democratic Party that are saying we are going to build a movement that is independent, a mass movement that's making our demands, and we're not going to actually accept the leadership of the Democratic or Republican Party telling us what's acceptable or not.
All very good points. And we are speaking with David Keith Cobb, presidential candidate 2004 for the Green Party. And we're talking about outside of the box thinking here for candidates. And in fact, this weekend is the Washington State Democratic Convention. And FYI, I'm a delegate to the state convention. I will be there, and Jill Stein is going to be in the park across the street from the convention, and she's going to be gathering signatures in Don Pugnetti Park. And there's going to be a march and rally outside the Washington State Democratic Convention in Tacoma, and that's going to be Friday from 9:30 until 2 p.m. And they're going to be collecting signatures to get Jill Stein, the presumed presidential nominee for the Green Party USA, on the Washington ballot in November, and they need our help. So,
Well, thank you for that. And again, what I love is seeing progressives say, I don't care if you're in the Democratic Party, in the Green Party, in the Socialist Party, or in the Labor Party, or the pink and white polka dot party. We are going to work together to actually build a mass movement make our demands, and we're going to engage in electoral politics, but we're not only going to engage in electoral politics. You know, Kim, one of the things that Washington state organizers and social change agents know and do so well is to build alternative institutions. And KAOS is one of them, right? KAOS Radio exists in large part because of unpaid volunteers who have said, it's not enough to just hate the corporate media. We actually want to create people's media. And imagine if we were not only creating people's media, but we were creating community-supported agriculture programs so that we could meet our food needs for food production and distribution systems that are not corporatized. Oh, wait, y'all are already doing that. What if we actually said we want to meet our needs for housing instead of just going into these corporate-owned apartment buildings or absentee landlords, and instead we want to create housing cooperatives where we're actually living, working, and playing together in a house. Oh, wait, y'all are already doing that. What if we actually said we wanted to actually create jobs where people are actually in control through economic worker democracy, in control of the decisions about not only how we do our work, but who gets paid and how much? Oh, wait, y'all are already doing that. The point I'm making, Kim, is that really Washington, and especially the Olympia area, is ripe with examples of people creating new institutions that prove that we can meet our needs without exploiting other people, without destroying the planet and the environment, and without the billionaire class both controlling the process and extracting our wealth and labor as a result. At the end of the day, we at Move to Amend recognize we have to build alternative institutions that meet our needs. We have to engage in social change work and culture shifting work. We have to engage in elections. In other words, it's not either or, it's both and. We have to do all of these things, and when we start to do all of these things across race and gender and class and sexual orientation, we really start to come into a sense of our own power and really what is possible.
Indeed, that is right on the money there, David. I couldn't agree with you more. We need to really change, as Bernie says, we need a political revolution, and he says he's not the revolution, we are.
It's so well said. I'm glad that you brought that up, and it always makes me smile when I hear Bernie Sanders say that. And here's how Move to Men thinks about it and talks about it. You know, we definitely need a political revolution in this country. We need to restructure the social, political, and economic institutions. So yes, we need a political revolution. And a real political revolution can never be dependent upon any one candidate, no matter how great that candidate is, because she or he is just one person. A real political revolution actually cannot even be won or waged exclusively on an election timetable, right? The election calendar cannot tell us when we win or lose a political revolution. Because a real political revolution actually has to come from ordinary people educating, activating, and organizing amongst themselves, building a broad mass movement of support, and we have to be conscious and politically aware. We have to come together, and I respectfully submit to KAOS listeners that the WAMEND effort in Washington State and the Move to Amend effort nationally is a place where anyone who wants to engage in political revolution, we welcome you, we invite you to come in to this process so that we can continue to build within a structure and an organizational capacity that says we're not going away. And we've got a strategic plan to succeed. Oh, and by the way, Move to Amend has a 10-year written strategic plan that actually identifies how we expect to successfully amend the United States Constitution within 10 years. I want to encourage KAOS listeners to just go to the website movetoamend.org/plan, PLAN, and we put it in writing. It's got benchmarks. It's got a visionary approach. It's got a multiple strategies and multiple tactics. But the point is, it's a living document where we're outlining what we see as possible and how we intend to win.
Yes, in this county, in case listeners don't know, former Port Commissioner Sue Gunn has enlisted a lot of us Bernie Sanders supporters and other liberal, green, and independents to get together to meet June 22nd at the Thurston County Courthouse to talk about strategies for electing progressive and green, environmentally conscious, and anti-war candidates to local, state, and national positions. So
Kim, I know we're running out of time, so I totally support that. I hope that Move to Amender and Wamenders who are listening will actually show up and participate in that process and get involved, because it sounds like a very exciting place where political discussion is going to happen.
Yeah, we are just about out of time, and I want to thank you, David Cobb, and we just, if anybody wants to know more about you, you can just Google David Keith Cobb, and you'll find all about him. You've got a wiki. Did you know that?
How about that? But listen, the first thing I want to do is to thank KAOS, because it's a source of non-corporately filtered news, information, and analysis that allows we, the people, to talk to ourselves. The second thing I want to do is encourage people to go to the website movetoamend.org and sign the petition. Click that link so you can be one of the 405,000 people who are part of this growing movement. And third, WAMEND on the ballot. We need your help in Washington State to make sure that we fight back against the secret Koch brother funded effort. We suspect it's a secret Koch brother funded effort. We know it's secret, but we know that the people are going to win this campaign as long as the people come together.
And that is Initiative 735 we're talking about. It'll be on the ballot this fall, along with the presidential campaign.
You betcha.
All right.
Thanks so much for all you do, Kim.
Thank you very much for all you do, David. Talk to you soon.
Bye now.
This is
Bye-bye.
KAOS 89.3 FM, Olympia Community Radio. Following commentary is not necessarily the opinions of the staff, management, or underwriters of KAOS or the Evergreen State College. It is the opinions of the guest and the host.
People who won't leave well enough alone, always questioning authority and trying to stir things up? If so, thank you. Were it not for agitators like you, we wouldn't even have an America. The 4th of July would be just another hot day. We'd be singing God Save the Queen, and our government officials would be wearing white powdered wigs. Without agitators battling in politics, on the job, in the marketplace, for the environment, on Wall Street, in education, for civil liberties and rights, and all across our society, democratic progress wouldn't just stall, it would fall back. So keep agitating. In fact, join me every weekday for a little agitation inspiration. You can hear my commentaries Monday through Friday at 8:20 a.m. during the Breakfast Special on your listener-supported, volunteer-powered community radio station, KAOS 89.3 FM, Olympia.
And that being said, we've got another great guest coming up. This is Parallel University, and I'm your host, Kim Dobson, here every week on Thursday from noon to 1 Pacific. Our next guest is Coleen Rowley. She is a former FBI Special Agent, Division Counsel, who's in May 2002 memo to the FBI Director exposed some of the FBI's pre-9/11 failures and named Time Magazine's Persons of the Year in 2002. A couple days ago, after the shooting in Orlando, and the shooting in Orlando is tied to the war on terror. It is not in the way that Trump has been arguing. Most Americans still do not connect the dots, and that the increasing violence occurring domestically, the mass shootings, the active shooters, the hate crimes, and active acts of terror, which frankly blur all together, are not only blowback from what is the natural result of a war culture that glorifies war and war violence in the form of violent movies, video games, and military culture, Coleen says, I warned the FBI director February 2003 that this would happen and that he and the FBI would be helpless to stop it if the U.S. went ahead and launched a war in Iraq. Now both Trump and Clinton claim the military's actions are solutions to our problems, but a serious assessment of these various attacks shows the opposite. So you can read more of Coleen's writings at consortiumnews.com. So in just a few minutes we'll be joining Coleen on the air and to talk about some of the details of the political response to the shootings at the gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida, where 49 people died and over 50 were wounded with bullets from an AR-15 assault rifle or a rifle like that. There was a big filibuster in Congress yesterday. People stood up and said, we need to talk about banning assault weapons, and they held the floor for many, many hours, running out the clock for that day. So perhaps we'll get a movement to ban these anti-personnel weapons. They're not hunting weapons, in my opinion. I think they are mainly to kill people. And why do we need automatic weapons to kill people as private citizens, and especially people with tragic mental health issues? So, at any rate, we do have Coleen in about 3 minutes. Yeah, always a pleasure. In the meantime, I think I have to go back in history and count how many times you've been on KAOS here with us, but I think it's been over 10 and maybe even as many as 15 times. So always great to have you on the air.
Yeah, thanks again. I know it's been, we've talked a lot, and that's good because we won't have to, we have some background, I guess, and context going.
Yeah, I read your thing from the Institute for Public Accuracy, so I've given a little bit of background ahead of time. So the shooting in Orlando is tied to the war on terror, but not in the way Trump has been arguing. I did that piece. So how do you want to start this out, Coleen? I'm sure you got lots to say about the FBI's suggestions. What I've been hearing on the internet is that the FBI thinks it's homegrown and he's not tied to ISIS or Hezbollah, as he claims, because he plainly didn't know the difference between those two organizations as he was calling 911.
Right, and you know, that's probably one of the reasons also that they did close the cases when they did get, you know, tips calling into them. And people will say, well, you know, how can the FBI, I think one of the main questions the public has is, how can the FBI not know who the terrorists are when they get some information like this? And in this case, you know, his coworkers were very concerned about his comments. But then, of course, one of the comments was that he knew the Sarnoff brothers, he knew Hassan. He made some pretty, you know, boisterous claims. And, of course, the FBI found out those were not true. And most of these things, you know, it's like what they call a wannabe, who is name-dropping as if they know somebody, as if they're important. His father had somewhat of the same problem because he was claiming that he was a high-level official of Afghanistan or a government in exile, and he was just an individual who apparently went on the radio. But so kind of, you know, what's the word for that when you want to be famous? There's a fancy word for somebody who makes these kind of far-out claims, and as soon as you see that's not true, then you dismiss the rest of the things, like, well, then you can't be too dangerous because you just lied.
Delusions of grandeur?
That's exactly, that's it, delusions of grandeur. So he definitely had that. He probably also had different forms of mental illness. His former wife or estranged wife said that he might have had bipolar disorder because he went from being nice to being violent, and had a temper apparently, and abused her, as you know, obviously occurs in domestic abuse cases where usually a husband, can be a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, so he had that problem, and he had delusions of grandeur, and he probably was depressed. So I'm an armchair psychologist here, but there's at least 3 different mental illness things that seem to have, very obviously, you don't have to be an expert. You can look at that and say, well, this is exactly what he had. Now, on top of all of that, it looks like when he was shooting, a witness heard him, one of the victims heard him say, I'm shooting, he made a call and he said, I'm shooting because they're bombing my country, and referring apparently to Afghanistan. Well, he's a second generation from Afghanistan, and obviously, felt some affinity with Afghanistan. So that would fall into the category of more traditional, real blowback. People who are mad because the United States is bombing them, and then they fight back because they don't know what else to do when they're being attacked. So that would kind of be the more traditional blowback. Then you have the mental illness, and then final thing is that it looks like if he was gay or had gay tendencies, as again as his former wife said, and as witnesses say, he came into that club all the time, and then had not only the gay tendencies or whatever, or was maybe going to be outed, but on top of that had this, the condescension that comes from the culture, or at least his father's culture, where they really felt like the gay lifestyle was wrong according to the religion. So that creates this conflict, a deep psychological conflict that really messes people up. Not just him. It's messed up a whole bunch of even of our congresspersons who are later found out to be gay, but they were closeted gays, and while they were in power, they did everything in their power to pass laws gay, lesbian, transgender laws at the time, discriminatory laws. So that's a strange thing. It doesn't sound logical at all, but it happens all the time. So my opinion, and I think the opinion of some other retired intelligence people, this is not at all a straightforward case of certainly it's not at all a case of actual terrorism, as the FBI apparently has diagnosed. But on top of that, it's not even a straightforward case of blowback, unless you consider blowback to be a much bigger, broader thing, as I do, which is now increasing domestic violence in general. So, and the way we have that kind of blowback, which is the Newtown shooter, these real senseless public shootings, school, church, public place, mall, the Giffords parking lot, these public place shootings that the FBI calls active shooters, mass shootings, and have vastly increased in the past couple of years. And, no one asks, why is that? Why are we having almost one of these mass shootings once a week? Well, I think it is due to blowback, but it's due to blowback from the wars in the widest sense that we are militarized, and people who are watching American Sniper and see that you become a hero by shooting people, and it solves your problems, you go out in a blaze of glory, you get your 10 minutes of fame. It's a kind of a copycat. When people used to always talk about copycat murders, because if a film came out, a popular film that a lot of people saw, in which some high-risk behavior was exhibited, then many people attempted to do that. Usually they were almost suicidal, high-risk behaviors. If it was depicted in a movie and captured the imagination of people, there would be vulnerable people the next day that would go out and do these things. It was called copycat. And I think we have that going on right now because we are portraying killing and war and violence as the American way. You see it in all of our films. You see it in the violent video games. Little kids from 5 years old on are sitting there doing nothing but shooting and killing, in a surreal way, but no different than what the drone pilots are doing. And so, and then of course you go to a football game and you're worshipped. A whole crowd of thousands of people stands up and worships this type of thing. And so I think that is one of the main reasons why we're now seeing this this, again, very broad form of blowback, which is our own domestic mass shooting. And this case seems to definitely fall at least partly in that category. It's like the Newtown, the Navy Yard, senseless, completely senseless. And so, the FBI Director James Comey a couple of times was quoted as saying, we are really trying to figure out the motivation for this. Well, you tell me the motivation for the Aurora Theater shooter or the Navy Yard shooter or the Newtown shooter. They aren't logical or rational. These are just people that want to get their 10 minutes of fame. They're mentally ill, and there's not a real logical motivation there. They see violence as the answer to their personal problems.
And indeed, I tend to agree with you, Coleen. The violence is cultural, and it's taught in this culture, and it's reinforced in the media, it's reinforced in video games, just like you say. It's 24 was another example that I thought was really a poor role model for Americans to be watching too, with Kiefer Sutherland playing this special agent that was always...
Hero.
He was the hero, but it usually meant death and destruction, whatever was going on, and
that's the plot itself. The hero has to do terrible, bad, what we would normally think of as evil things, but he becomes a hero because he saves lives by doing wrongful things. That is essentially the plot, and that is exactly what these people see as yet. Well, yeah, of course, shooting people is bad, but I will actually be seen as a hero by ISIS or by Afghans or whatever. And so, and it's exactly the same plot as 24 or 0 Dark 30.
Right.
Actually, by the way, it's also the same theme as Hillary's book, Hard Choices. The title
Right.
itself is, or Madeleine Albright, when she said, it's worth it to kill 500,000 children because I've got a noble purpose, I've got a great goal here, that democracy or whatever it was she was trying to say she was doing. So it's worth it to kill. Normally, yes, it would be bad that 500,000 children had to die. Same thing with Hillary Clinton. Normally, launching bombing on civilian populations, yes, normally that would be seen as bad, but because I am in this elite category as a hero and know that it will have, the outcome will be this noble goal. And you'll see that plot. That's been the plot actually since 9/11 in all of our films. And these copycat people are just copying that plot. That's exactly what they're doing.
I thought it was kind of interesting that I've seen a clip being shared on the internet about Hillary laughing about Gaddafi's death, and if anybody knows the details of his death, I'm not going to repeat it, but it was horrible, and it was not a great thing to hear about, and yet she was laughing about it.
Yeah, it's a window into her mentality, and very similar to, again, that quick response by Madeleine Albright. They're on the exact same wavelength. When you see yourself as saving lives and some kind of noble hero, warrior, savior, whatever you want to call it, like the protagonist in Jeff Bauer in 24, then you absolutely will. You won't have any shame or conscience about it at all, because you're doing these other people. All they may not understand. Yeah, they think torture's wrong, but I know I saved lives. By the way, it's the same plot in this newest movie called, the title I don't recall, but it's Helen Mirren, and she's, an officer that has to make this hard decision, again, hard choice of killing a child because she knows that if she doesn't launch a drone bomb on an area that includes a child, or more than one child, I don't know, if she knows that if she doesn't, these bombers then are going to go kill nearby in another place. And so again, she becomes the hero. And it's exactly the same plot, that we are seeing. By the way, just think about the general public. It's about 60% of the American public now that believe that torture it saves lives. They believe you have to torture to get information, to find the ticking time bombs, in order to save lives. And so they're for it. You know, when they give the polls, 60% of the American public, you would in those polls before 9/11, I would imagine, I mean, I'm just going to guess, but I bet you anything it was probably less than 20% of the American public that would have said torture is good and justified and necessary before 9/11. But once those shows started running, and once our propaganda by all our highest officials, again, it's not just fictional films, it's also our highest officials saying these things, that we have to drone bomb and saving lives, that we have to, Dick Cheney and whatever said we had to torture because it saved lives. So, in any event, most people, it's not just this individual and not just mentally ill people, actually most people will fall into this because this utilitarian ethics is extremely powerful because people now think they are ethical. They think it is ethical to do wrong things because you're doing them for a noble goal of helping other people. By the way, the right to protect, humanitarian war, that's based on the same exact theory too. Yes, we have to bomb these people, but yes, we're trying to stop a genocide, or we're trying to stop Gaddafi giving Viagra to rape, you know, all these lies that are said. This is the problem with utilitarian ethics. They are all fictional. You know, you should just understand that as Jack Bauer is fictional, so are the statements from the officials saying, and every one of them, oh, if we don't bomb Libya and Gaddafi's forces, they're going to take Viagra and rape the women in the area, and they're gonna attack Benghazi, whatever. Those are all made up, Same with weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It's no different than a script writer who's going to write a very compelling script for 24 or for one of these, or the Helen Mirren movie. When you're going to write a script, yeah, that's the kind of thing that's going to draw people in. You know, people are going to say, oh, yes, we have to do it. They're going to cry tears when the kid dies, but then, you know, it's going to be noble goal afterwards because he saved lives. That's all. No one knows the outcome. They're making these things up as if an outcome can justify the worst thing.
Well, I think
Real ethics is not utilitarian because real ethics is based on time-tested, hundreds of years of universal principles that have worked in the long run and that people have realized are the rules we should live by in civilization. And that's why there's this big distinction between the utilitarian ethics and what you call, you know, rule-based ethics.
the ends justify the means when in fact actually the golden rule, do as unto others as you would want done to yourself, is actually the old rule, which tends to work out better in the long run.
Exactly.
I wanted to say one thing about Libya and the blowback there. You know, Muammar Gaddafi may have been a bad guy, but he was our bad guy. He was, it's my understanding, he was actually cooperating with the CIA.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he was keeping Al Qaeda from North Africa from taking over the southern part of his country.
Exactly.
So what do we get?
Another function he was serving is the poor refugees for other reasons from other parts of Africa that they had no place to go. They were also fleeing other war-torn zones. He was like a gatekeeper because when they got to Libya, he was employing them. They actually had one of the best economies, highest education places. It was one of the best places in Africa. So he was stopping this migrant flow into Europe. He was helping that. But you know, Robert Gates, of course, is again, you say you wouldn't want to be friends with any of these people on a personal level. You know, people in positions of power tend to be pretty jaundiced and skewed. They're not the kind of people you want to have a beer with. You know,
Right.
notwithstanding the stupid television stuff, you know, what a wonderful nice guy that I'd like to have a beer with. That's not true. When people have risen to the top of most groups, even groups like the Catholic Church and whatever, when they've risen to the top, by and large, they have made all kinds of moral compromises, and they tend to have psychopathic leadership traits. So none of these people, including Robert Gates, I wouldn't want to be friends with him. However, on the eve of Obama and Hillary, by the way, pushed by Hillary Clinton, I don't think Obama was especially keen on this either, but Hillary Clinton and Samantha Power and Susan Rice, these three women, pushed for this bombing of Libya. And on the eve of that, Robert Gates, he's no shrinking violet, he was arguing against it, and exactly for some of the reasons we were just talking about. So in terms of pragmatic, I know a lot of, especially liberals, don't quite understand this because they often think that ethics and pragmatism are not the same. Oh, I want to do this out of the goodness of my heart. But actually, what you'll often find out is that, as you just said, the golden rule and being altruistic and being smart enough to realize longer-term outcomes rather than short-term. Yeah, you can kill Gaddafi, and yes, you can take out that government. But what is the longer-term outcome? Well, destabilization, increase of terrorism, and the poor war refugees now drowning in the Mediterranean. Those, all you had to do was think a little bit longer than the thrill of winning your war and jumping up and down when you take out a government as if you had some short-term success. That's the kind of people now that we are voting for elected office in this country. It's not just Hillary Clinton. There's certainly plenty of others that are in these positions.
Well,
it's a very sad, sorry state.
It's pretty. Mr. Trump has made some very inflammatory, scary statements as well, and we're given the choice of two evils, I think, in this election cycle for president. They have eliminated the moderate people in the running, and
anybody anybody that's halfway, like I said, you don't even have to be. You don't even have to be some great, benevolent, Einstein smart. You just have to be, not these crazy, insane neocon war hawks. I mean, this is absolutely insane, and I continue to wonder why more people don't understand, when something terrible happens, like the shooting and this blowback, why they can't connect the dots now. And say, oh my gosh, there's some recognition that launching the Iraq War was wrong and had terrible consequences, but very little recognition about many of the other terrible things like the drone bombing. I mean, most people now in the United States think that's good, it's working, it's fine. They don't understand that it's increasing the level of terrorism.
Ralph Nader has always said that we have two parties of business, and it's a duopoly, and they're both concerned about making money and continuing the power of the military-industrial complex, the big banks, and ultimately that power all comes from the 1%. He's said it more eloquently than that, but it's clear that that's what happens in politics when we allow 501c4s and unlimited corporate campaign money.
Absolutely. And that is the track we're on. People could almost, if you were betting, say the next president, no matter who it is going to be worse even than the Obama Hillary Clinton thing, and even, of course, worse than George Bush and Dick Cheney. I mean, it's just like we can't stop. Just like, spinning out of control. The worst thing, of course, facing is this potential for nuclear war. With confronting, and Hillary is right there, wanting to confront at least Donald Trump. Is not so gung-ho about confronting either Russia or China. And a number of progressives now have kind of at least given some credit for that, as opposed to Hillary. There's like a raging debate about who's the lesser evil. And Blum, I don't know, what's William Blum? William Blum, who's written this long, Howard Zinn touted him as being the most expert on empire. He's written, I forget the title of the empire or something, but he's well known, William Blum. John Pilger, the Australian documentarian. William Greider, who writes for The Nation. I'm trying to think, there's about 4 or 5. Stephen Cohen, whose wife is Katrina Vanderhebel, who publishes The Nation. They are all arguing on the side that because Donald Trump, at the very least, he has all these terrible talking out of both sides of his mouth, he never knows what he's going to do.
We're going to have to leave it there, Coleen. We're out of time. I got to let in the next programmer. We've been speaking with Coleen Rowley, former FBI Special Agent and Division Counsel. Thank you so much, as always, Coleen, for joining us today on KAOS.
Thank you.
And have a great day. I'm looking forward to our next conversation.